Hello there, it's Michelle Short here and I'm delighted to be guesting on the Syberia Designs YouTube channel. Today I have a clean and simple card to share with you using the Fantasy Flowers die set. So let's get started. This is the Fantasy Flowers die set. It's just so pretty. I love that you can mix and match the different dies. So you've got stems, I'm not actually using them today, but you've got leaves and then various elements of the flower that you can build up. I have die cut the flowers and the leaves from some scrap pieces of cardstock. I'm using two shades for the flowers of aqua, purple and pink. I've done one shade of green for the leaves and then two shades of yellow for the flower centres. I'm adding some temporary adhesive onto a piece of scrap paper here, and I'm just placing the kind of front pieces of the flowers on top. This is my lightest shade of the cardstock, and I just want to add a little bit of ink blending towards the bottom of these petals. I'm using Distress inks for this, and I'm starting off with picked raspberry for the pink flower. And what I love is that when you add the ink blending on top, it really brings out those indentations in the die cut and just kind of brings them out a little bit, and I think it's really pretty. So just adding that colour towards the bottom. I'm then going in with peacock feathers for the aqua piece. Now this colour isn't particularly a lot darker than the actual cardstock colour that I've used, but it still just adds a little bit extra onto that die cut. And then I can use wilted violet for the purple flower, and this one is the size smaller, so I use two of the larger flowers and one of the smaller ones. And you can see here where it really picks up that colour in the indentations. I've then got the leaves, and again I've added them onto a scrap piece of paper with temporary adhesive. And I'm using some Mowed Lawn Distress ink, and I'm adding that towards the bottom of the leaves. So I do tend to kind of dab off the excess ink off of the brush first and then bring it onto the die cut. I just feel that I get a slightly smoother blend that way. To be honest, you're not going to see a huge amount of this colour once I pop them underneath the flowers, but I did just like that it was there. So I can just remove those from the paper. And then I've got the leaves and the fronts of the flowers all blended. I'm then going to assemble the flowers, and I found the easiest way was to kind of pop the lightest piece on top of the darkest piece at the back and just kind of place it there so that I can see how far this centre portion of the flower needs to go in. So I'm just adding some Barely Art glue onto the back of that piece there. And then I can kind of pop that underneath, or in between the layers I should say. So I can just place that down, and then I've got the other piece of the kind of centre, and I cut that from darker yellow. I think you could do these in all sorts of different colours, but I quite liked having them yellow. It just kind of brings a little bit more sort of summery spring vibes to the card. So I can just pop that inside as well. And then I can add some more liquid glue onto the back of this front piece. I thought it would be really nice to add it on with some foam tape so it kind of looked a little bit more dimensional, but I am actually adding quite a lot of layers of foam tape onto this card, so I didn't want to add even more, but I do think it would look really nice. So just making sure that those pieces are lined up nicely, and then I can set that aside to dry. And I'm just going to do the same thing for the other flowers. So I've got this little purple one here. Adding some adhesive onto the back of that. And again, I can just pop that in. And I like to use tweezers, as you can see here, because some of the elements are really quite tiny. It's quite helpful just to be able to hold them with the tweezers. So adding some glue onto the back of the front piece there, and then I can just stick that down. And then I can do the exact same thing for the last flower, the aqua one. And I thought this colour combination would work really nicely together. Some of my favourite colours basically. So just popping that piece down, and then I've got my 3 flowers all assembled. I'm then going to stamp a sentiment, and I'm going to take the Happy Birthday sentiment from the For You stamp set. And I'm going to stamp that down onto some white cardstock. So I've added that into the mini Misty. Just placing that down. And then I can close the door of the Misty and pick that stamp up. I'm then going to ink up the stamp with Obsidian pigment ink. So just inking up that stamp really well. And then I can press that down onto the cardstock. And I do stamp it twice just to make sure that I get a really nice dark impression. And I really love this sentiment because it looks like you kind of heat embossed it on black cardstock, but it's taken a lot less time. I'm then taking one of the sentiment dies from the Spring Garden die set, and although it's not made to cut out this sentiment, it just cuts it a little bit smaller, and actually I quite liked that. So I'm just placing that down, holding it down with some low tack tape, running that through my die cutting machine, and then I can just cut off the 2 sides with my mini guillotine. And then because you can see the white core of the cardstock, I did just want to cover that up. So I'm taking a Copic brush marker here, and I'm just going around all of the edges, and that's just going to neaten it up slightly so that you don't see any of the white core of the cardstock. I just think it looks a little bit neater. I then want to add some interest onto the panel of my cardstock that I'm going to add the flowers onto, and I'm taking the speckled background stencil and I'm going to emboss that. I really love embossing with stencils. You get a lot more use out of stencils if you can use them in lots of different ways. So I'm going to emboss with the Platinum 6 here. So I started off with the platform base, the platform top, I added the stencil down, my cardstock on top, I then added a scrap piece of paper. I'm then taking the embossing mat and adding that on top, and then the adapter plate on top of that. And I'm going to run that through the die cutting machine. And although it's not going to give a massive impression like you would if you were using an embossing folder, it really does work really nicely, and it's just going to add some subtle interest onto the background of my card. So I can just remove those plates. And then I'll show you what it looks like. I just think it looks really pretty, and I really love the pattern with this speckled background. I'm then taking my flowers and I'm just going to arrange them to start with where I think I want them to be before I stick anything down. So I've just got my flowers there, and then I can pop the leaves behind. And like I said, you don't really see a huge amount of that ink blending on those leaves because I really do stick them quite down, like, you know, quite into the flowers. But I think it still looks nice. So I'm just kind of popping these in, see where I want them to be placed. And I think I'm quite happy with that arrangement. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take each leaf out individually and add some glue onto the back of it and then pop that down underneath. And I find that this is quite a good way to be able to assemble arrangements. There are so many different ways you could do this, but I personally just find this probably the easiest way. So then I'm just going to take the next leaf and pop that in, and then just do the same thing with all the other leaves. I do think this would look really nice having the stems of the flowers, but I actually just wanted to have like an arrangement in the middle of the card. So I'm not going to add the last leaf at this moment in time. I am going to start sticking on the flower heads, and I'm using some thin foam tape for that. So just added some of that onto the back of the flower, removing the release tape, and then I can pop that down. And again, I like to use tweezers. It means that I can kind of hover it over where I think I'm going to press it down first. Once I'm happy with the placement, I can then press that down. I can add the purple flower next to it. And then I'm adding in this leaf now before I add in the aqua flower. So I've added some more thin foam tape onto the back of that aqua flower, and then I can just pop that down as well. I've then added some more thin foam tape onto the back of that panel, and I'm going to adhere it down onto an A2 size white card base. So that's a finished size of 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. I'm then adding some more thin foam tape onto the back of the sentiment. And then I'm going to grab my T-square ruler just so that I can try and place it down straight. So I don't necessarily actually place the sentiment down onto where the ruler is. I just kind of hover it below just so that I can see where a straight line is. And then I can just press that down. And then to finish off, I'm adding some iridescent bubbles around the flowers and the leaves, just for a little bit of sparkle. So adding some small dabs of the Burley Art Glue. And then I can pop those iridescent bubbles on top. And once the glue dries, it will dry completely clear. And so that is the card finished for today. I really love how that speckled background looks embossed on the card base. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description box. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.